I think the key thing is that you need to not be chained by your family business. You've got to have the ability to make your own choices and to get experience from outside the family businesses. Because if you only stay within the family business from the day you turn 18, I think it's very, very difficult to be anything else but the boss's son, and you'll be treated accordingly. I would recommend everyone to go and work for a different company, have a boss, someone who actually, you have to report to, that you are accountable to. Do that for X number of years, get that experience under your belt, realize what it means to be an employee. And if then you decide that business or the family business is for you, then go back to the family company.
Welcome to YanaTV. Today our guest is Tristan Sjoberg, who is an executive chairman of TCS John Huxley Group of Companies and co-owner of Knutsson Holdings. And we're going to be talking about what it means to do business in different countries in Asia when you are not Asian. You were born in which country? Let's start with this.
I was born in Sweden just over 50 years ago. Yeah.
And when did you come to Asia for the first time?
I first came to Asia in 1989 when I was 18 years old on a scuba diving trip with a good friend of mine. But that was Thailand.
That was Thailand, yes.
2 weeks of scuba diving.
And what was the first impression? Do you remember when you landed in Thailand as an 18 years old?
Very different from Sweden. I came from Sweden in December. It was very cold. Obviously, Thailand in December is perfect climate for a Swede. And just the hustle and bustle of landing in Bangkok with everything that's going on. I was effectively a backpacking late teenager. And for me, it was like, wow, I didn't really know this part of the world existed. And I had a great time scuba diving, ate great food. And it was a fantastic experience. And I couldn't wait to go back.
But you did. You set up your companies, or actually, to be precise, it's a second generation business.
Yeah.
Right? So you took over from your father.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So my father passed away in 2012. And my brother and I, we inherited two companies. Mm-hmm. One is a diversified investment company based out of Gothenburg. The other one is TCS John Huxley, which is a casino equipment manufacturer distribution company headquartered in the UK, but with 11 offices around the world, 3 offices here in Asia. Mm-hmm. And I'm the executive chairman of that one, and I run it on a day-to-day basis.
When we talk about second-generation business owners, which you and your brother are, it's also a big topic in Asia, because many businesses in Asia are generational. So I'm just curious, your perspective, again, as a son who took over from the father, was it an easy decision for you?
And it was not an easy decision until later in life.
Okay.
Because when I was 18, I worked for 2 years in a casino in Sweden and became a roulette dealer, a croupier. And I did that for 2 years whilst I was sort of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. Then I moved to the UK, to Wales, to study marine biology and chemical oceanography. I was fortunate enough after 3 years of study to be offered a PhD studentship. Following that, I wanted to get some business skills, but I was still set on being a scientist. So I did an MBA at Oxford University. So after 9 years of study, I decided at that stage I didn't really want to become a research scientist, but I wanted to sort of work within science. But I graduated on 9/11, 2001. The 9/11, 2001. And obviously at that point in time, it was virtually impossible to find a job. I sat down with my father and he said, why don't you come and join the family company? Get some experience under your belt. If nothing else, it will look good on CV that you weren't unemployed. And, get to understand the family business. So I was 29 years old at that stage. And I've been stuck in the family company ever since. And I'm very happy about that.
Beautiful. And I'm just curious, your advice to those who find themselves in this situation when they have to make a choice, right? Since we are talking about the second or third or fourth, whatever you are, generation, but you have to take over from your parents fundamentally. And there are a lot of people right now, actually, especially late 20s, early 30s, because it's the decision usually made, which are thinking about it. And so they're thinking whether they want to do this or whether they want to pursue something entirely different. Is there something you would like to tell them?
Well, I think the key thing is that you need to not be chained by your family business. You've got to have the ability to make your own choices and to get experience from outside the family businesses. Because if you only stay within the family business from the day you turn 18, I think it's very, very difficult to be anything else but the boss's son, and you will be treated accordingly. I would recommend everyone to go and work for a different company, have a boss, someone who actually, you have to report to, that you are accountable to. Do that for X number of years, get that experience under your belt, realize what it means to be an employee. And if then you decide that business or the family business is for you, then go back to the family company.
I love the advice. It's almost like an initiation in a way, right? And also when you come back then to your family business, you're coming sort of with the higher reputation, because now you stand on your own feet, you achieved something, you know how to do things. And
actually, there's a very famous Swedish conglomerate, which is still family owned, the Stena family. And you are always guaranteed to be able to get a job there. But you always start from the bottom. And that's a very interesting one as well.
Interesting,
yeah.
Yes.
So, for example, I checked into a hotel in Stockholm a couple of years ago. And the guy who was the bellboy, he was actually a fourth generation from this family. And he was put to work in one of the hotels that was owned by this conglomerate.
I think it's very smart, actually.
And you'll have a job, but you have to fend for yourself.
Beautiful. Okay. I think it's also a good advice just going forward for those who are building a business right now and maybe planning to pass it on to children. It's good to start thinking, actually, how do you prepare your children then to lead the company, and are they fully equipped to do this or not?
Absolutely. There's always a possibility to join the family company. But it shouldn't be exclusive. It shouldn't be that way or the highway, you should get experience from somewhere else and then come back. I think it's good for the individual, and I think it's good for the company, because you need new experiences. You need new blood as well, right? And, when that new blood comes in, you have that experience of how other companies do it.
Exactly.
Because otherwise it's very easy to get stuck in, become blinkered. And I think it's very important that you actually, take those blinkers off and go into the job with an open bridle.
Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so you were doing that, you did your own journey, and, have been now, as you said, happily ever since, traveled all over the world, worked all over the world, and especially, I think you probably have been in every country in Asia, or worked in every country in Asia. Could we say this way?
Yeah, the one I've missed out really is Pakistan and Nepal. I haven't
okay,
been
so
up
those
there.
two. This is quite impressive. So I'm curious to hear about this particular aspect of your life. So maybe let's pick like 3-5 countries that, come to your mind at the very top, where you have been to, you did business, and there's something interesting you would like to share with us.
My favorite countries in Asia per se, and where I have the most experience and also success, would be, China, Japan, Singapore. Of course, we're here in lucky Singapore, Macau, and I think it's very important to sort of separate Macau from China, because even though it is one China, the method of doing business there are different, and the psyche is different. I do have a soft spot for Indonesia as well. So
beautiful. Okay, let's start with China. So how did China come into your life?
China came into my life almost in two different ways, almost simultaneously. First, I met a Chinese girl in London.
That's right, your wife is from China.
Yes, she's from China. At the same time, we also started Knutsson Holdings. We started looking at investing in China. So I made various trips to China around 2003 through to 2008 and 9. China became very much a place I frequented, certainly on a monthly basis, and I still do. I co-own a condo in Beijing, and I'm there almost all the time. And of course, my 2 children are half Chinese, right?
Of course. So how is it to do business in China?
Doing business in China is not as fraught with difficulty as some would have you believe. It's the Chinese are very emotional people, so it's and that's a good thing, because you can usually read what they want and what makes them tick, unlike some of the other cultures in Asia, which are much more difficult to read. And I think one of the key things is that, in any business deal, but particularly true in China, is that it's got to be a win-win. Mm-hmm. Everyone's got to win. Your Chinese partner's got to win, you got to win. Mm-hmm. And if you fulfill those criteria and you have an open, transparent dialogue, it's not that difficult doing business in China.
And what about stories that they say you can't trust anyone in China, and there are all those stories that people say everyone going to cheat on you, right?
Yeah, I've never suffered anything like that. I've never had those kind of problems. It is an ever-changing regulatory environment, though, and you have to understand that laws and regulations in China are written very vaguely, because that's how the Chinese government wants it. So you're more at risk at regulatory clampdown, or that the regulation or the law goes towards a direction that you don't want to go with your business. But in terms of business partners, I've never experienced that.
Macau, what is the difference between doing business in those 2 places? Because you said we want to separate it, right, when we look at it? So
yeah.
So Macau was ruled by the Portuguese for 200 years. And there is certainly a Latin flair to Macau. When you do business there, it is certainly a bit more of a sort of cowboy town.
Rules are not quite as strictly adhered to. There's a little bit more let's fly by night and let's get this thing done, rather than in China, which can be actually quite rigid in terms of what you can and can't do and how you structure things. So I do think that Macau is certainly an island that plays by its own rules, and some for worse, some for better.
Love that. Japan, huge country, also mystical, not very open to foreigners, again, particularly non-Asians.
Yeah.
So how was your experience there?
Well, my first experience was a very, very good one, because I was actually pitching for a deal, and my competitor was an American company, and we met with the principal of the Japanese company we were trying to seal the deal with, and we effectively met at their offices. There was the customary exchange of gifts. I took the gift and looked at it very closely and carried it with me during the whole time. The other guy I was up against, he basically took one quick look at it, gave it to his assistant, and said, "Don't forget to pack this," and then never looked at it. Then a couple of minutes later, we get the business cards from the Japanese chairman. Obviously, I took it with both hands and I looked at it, I studied it. During our meeting, during the negotiations, I had it on the table in front of me at all times. My competitor, he basically didn't look at the card, he stuck it in his pocket and ignored it. The next day, I got a call saying I won the business, even though I was a good 10-15% more expensive than my competitor. So it's certainly about being respectful in the environment you're in, and just not be rude. Just don't be an idiot and be respectful. So I think from a logistical point of view, doing business in Asia is difficult for a non-Japanese speaking Westerner, and also understanding the culture. How you actually do the deal, and the many different steps. And I found in my experience, if you do a deal in Japan, a handshake is often better than a well-drafted legal agreement. If there is a handshake with a Japanese partner, he is honor-bound to fulfill his obligations. Whereas if there's an agreement written, detailed by lawyers, then people tend to say, let's find loopholes. But
interesting. Well, that's what a business tip. Indonesia.
Indonesia, again, one of my favorite countries. My recommendation in doing business in Indonesia is become friends with Indonesians first, and business will follow, not the other way around. So I would certainly understand Indonesian culture, understand Indonesian way of life, the outlook, learn about the history of Indonesia. It's a country that has over the last 50 years, even 100 years, gone through some tumultuous times. But I would say, get to know Indonesians, understand Indonesian culture, become friends with Indonesians, then look at doing business.
Singapore, since we're here, right? So we have to do the whole circle and come back.
Absolutely, Singapore. Well, that's my choice. So my first visit to Singapore was in the early 2000s. I was actually working in Australia at the time, and I had a 2-day layover in Singapore on the way back to London, where I was living. So I sort of stopped off in Singapore, and I was absolutely gobsmacked with what I saw. I didn't realize Singapore was as advanced as it was. So I came back to London and I said, I've got to come back to Singapore. I've got to come back to Singapore. So every time I went to Australia for the next few years, I stopped off in Singapore and got to know the city more and more. And then when Singapore liberalized the laws and decided to have 2 integrated resorts, I decided I need to move to Singapore.
That's exactly the golden spot.
Yeah, exactly the golden spot. You know, that intersection between Western culture and Asian culture. And it's very easy for an expat Westerner like myself to slip into the culture and the way of things here. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed moving to Asia. It took me some time to convince my wife, who's from China, because her career was really taking off in London as an investment banker. So it took me about a year. First year I asked her in 2008, she said no. I decided to, take her to Singapore. She's never been to Singapore. So I decided to take her on a week's vacation in Singapore. My wife is a big Formula 1 fan. So it was the inaugural race in 2008, the night race in Singapore.
Wow, yes, I remember
so
that
I got a paddock club tickets for the night race. I booked us the best hotels. She loves animals, so I booked a night safari, les amis, French food, everything. And, we had a great week here. And then on the flight back said, darling, if we move to Singapore, every week is going to be like this, right? This will be our standard routine. And, somehow that convinced her.
Good.
So we moved in 2009 to Singapore, and we've been here ever since. Our 2 kids are born here. They're very happy here. It's a great place to be. Rearing kids. They love it here. Still struggling for them to understand they're half Swedish, half Chinese, and not Singaporean.
So they think they're Singaporean?
Pretty much, yeah.
So business part of Singapore. So how is this experience for you, since we covered all other countries?
Singapore is great for business. There's no question about it. You have a very clear, transparent rule of law here. You have an amazing opportunities to set up a company here and to grow the company. You have to be a little bit wary about what Singapore is very good at and where they are still developing. In terms of the creative space, they are still developing, but they are exceptionally good at making sure things running on time, the protocols, asset management, all those aspects of business, which is 80% of running a business, can be done much better here than in most other parts of Asia. It's an amazing place to run business. You can attract talent here. It's a great work ethic. It's a very good place to have a business here. Absolutely.
Back to the family. Since we're starting conversations about children also, I'm just very curious, right? When you have the mixed family, and particularly when you have kids of mixed races, and so they have Swedish, they have Chinese, but they think they're Singaporean. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah.
So how old are they, if I may ask?
So they're 7 and 9.
And like as a parent, right, when you look at them, what do you think kind of future you would like to have for them? And where is the world heading in Asia particularly, like in their development?
Well, I'll answer your question, but I will like to start off with a little cute story.
Okay, please.
And that is my kids go to Tanglin Trust School, and in one particular corridor in Tanglin Trust School, all the flags are hanging down. And so I walk my kids to school one morning, and they see the Swedish flag. So they point at it and says, "That's Baba flag." Then a couple of meters later, they see the Chinese flag. And they say, "That's Mama flag." And then about 10 meters later, they see the Singaporean flag. And they proudly say, "That's my flag."
That's a cute story.
Yeah, that's pretty much how they see themselves. And of course, why wouldn't they? You know, they're born here, they're brought up here. You know, this is their home, for sure. But to answer your question then, you know, what does the future hold for kids who are born and brought up in Singapore but holding a different passport? It's a very tricky one, because, you know, if you ask me the same question 10, 15 years ago when I first moved here, I would say definitely primary school here, then off to boarding school in the UK or in Switzerland or something like that, and get a Western style education towards prepping them for university. Now I'm not so sure. I definitely think they need to be out of Singapore for a couple of years to see that Singapore is a bubble. You know, there is a whole world out there that is not as safe and secure as Singapore, and they need to grow a bit of skin on their nose to make sure that they are prepared for what the world has to offer outside of Singapore. It's just that we are too safe and too secure in our environment here. And Singapore is a small island, and they need to understand what the big world is like outside of Singapore. So I do think they need to have exposure to the world at some stage in their teens, but it is by no means a certainty they'll go to university in the classical locations such as the UK or in the US. Or Australia. I will have no hesitation sending them to Tsinghua University in Beijing. I would have no hesitation sending them to NUS, for example. I think the Asian universities are really come leaps and bounds in the last 20 years. And this is the region where I can still see growth. You know, when I go back to Europe now these days, I don't see growth, but I see it here. You know, it doesn't matter whether I go to Jakarta or Singapore, or if I was in Hong Kong a couple of weeks ago. You know, that can-do attitude is here in Asia. And I think that's what I want my girls to tap into. So I would have no problem for them to go to university in Asia.
Thank you so much, Tristan. That was such a pleasure to have you here with us on the show today. I love the depth and the variety and diversity of our conversation. I think it's amazing, you know, business tips, and it's also very interesting perspective on the family and where the future is heading. So thank you for being with us today. Yeah. And that was Tristan Sjoberg on YanaTV. And as you can see, we talked about a lot of things, and we would love to hear from you guys in the comments. How do you feel? Perhaps you're also an expert who is living in Singapore. Maybe you did work in other countries in Asia. Then just share with us what is your experience. Absolutely connect with Tristan. So we will include all the relevant links. Remember, subscribe to our channel, share this episode with friends, and we are very grateful to Muse Studio for hosting YanaTV. And what are those stories? It's okay. I'm also coughing. I actually also wanted to do this. So, exactly.